And we're back. So, why didn't anyone tell me I was about to get an existential flashback that lasted an entire volume of the story? Huh? Why didn't anyone warn me about how emotionally vulnerable this would make me? I thought we had a rapport. I trusted you. In the material I covered for the first video, Arakawa proved to me that she knew how to set up interesting themes and an engaging world. In the second video's material, she showed me she wasn't all talk and could deliver some of the absolute best fight scenes I've ever seen. And now this week, she's pulling out all the stops. And I know, in the first video I said, oh, this is going to be a 3-video series. Well, guess what, nerds? Times change. Sometimes plans don't go the way you thought they would. Sometimes you naively begin with a vision of how you see things going, and maybe you had to compromise your vision in the name of something you didn't believe in, and in the process, struggle to justify the newfound blood in your hands. But resolutely, you trudge forward in the name of your dream, despite how impossible it might seem. Oh God, Ron Mustang, you have my heart.
And my axe.
But enough preamble, it's time to get into the emotional thick of it with the beginning of this video in a surprising turn of events as we dive into the past of Fullmetal Alchemist. One thing I would like to know actually is whether or not at this point in the story, did anime only fans know that Hohenheim was actually some superpowered dude and could tank like 10 bullets to the chest like they were nothing? I mean, I think from the stuff I covered last week, that has to be the wildest scene. How could the anime skip that scene? It seems really important. Like, surely they must have replaced it with something afterwards to clue the audience in, right? So yeah, please, if anyone has any answers to this question, let me know in the comments down below. With that aside, we open this week with a tense scene, one where King Brad confronts Mustang, Al, and Ed over being exposed as a big, dumb, tattoo eye-having bad guy. But what struck me as the most creepy aspect was how calm the atmosphere was. Edward was allowed to mouth off and diffuse any and all tension with humor. It feels as though there's a sense that Ed is in control at times, or at the very least, isn't as concerned as he should be. That is until Bradley reveals the ace up his sleeve, one that again harkens back to a bunch of volumes prior when he had a private conversation with Winry. He's been so far ahead of the game, it's nuts to think about. And now, to keep Ed and co in line, Winry's safety is threatened if they don't cooperate, so not great. That actually surprised me massively, and thankfully, nothing happens to the little girl. However, what it did bring to the focus is that there are some things that these guys will inevitably be unable to account for, and that's the cunning of the hero's side. And one character embodies this more than any other in my book, particularly in this section, and he was my favorite from last week's material. And man, does he pull one out of the hat here this week to get a message out despite not actually being in control. This is such a cool idea, and God, I love Ling. Like, this was such a smooth move, and it creates a wonderful tension around the new greed and how he might be compromised by Ling moving forward. This, I am certain, will lead to some amazing swerves at the final hour later on. It's got surprise bait written all over it. But I think from this early portion of this week's material, my main point of focus has to be on a throwaway line by some of the townsfolk Ed helps out later on. They mentioned that the other alchemists sent earlier couldn't transmute anything to help them fix the town. It claimed that correlated with the exact moment Ed had his powers taken away by Pipe Man. I actually don't know what his name is. What is his name? What do people call him? Father. Okay, yeah, taken away by Father. Alright, that sounds kind of kinky, but whatever.
Oh, kinky!
And so, that made me wonder, is this dude a literal god? Is Father a god? There was some exposition earlier alluding to the position for alchemy being similar to that of prayer. And this father figure can turn off the transmutation powers of everyone, not just those he chooses. Why does he look like Hohenheim? This all makes no sense to me. I'm really left scratching my head with this one, guys. I mean, I have no idea what's going on. However, this isn't the part I alluded to in my intro. Instead, it's the material contained within Volume 15. It's deeply troubling, deals with some very serious subject matter. It's very much loosely inspired by real-life events that Arakawa researched and interviewed former vets for. This is the origin of the story itself and the foundations Fullmetal Alchemist as a story are built upon. Told through the perspectives of both Scar to Marco as well as Hawkeye to Edward upon request, the curtain is finally pulled on the troubling past as we're hurled years and years into the Ishvalan Civil War. I'm very much a fan of getting a chance to see the past Civil War that acts as a backdrop to all the story that's taken place. It's great to see scenes with Winry's parents and getting to see where she got her healing hands from. Being a mechanic in this day and age may as well be a doctor to her friends and clients at this point. Now, I want to make clear that I do love this section, and I mean love this section with a capital L, and I will explain why in just a moment, but I do have one issue with it. And while it is a nitpick, I will say this isn't the first time Arakawa has taken this approach and had the same narrative issue. Like I said moments ago, this is a story told from the points of view of Hawkeye predominantly, and that's the problem. The fact that this is presented through flashbacks from individual perspectives. There are certain scenes where I was left wondering how Hawkeye or even Marco were aware of the details concerning certain important and pivotal conversations they otherwise had no information on. We see scenes where the High Command strategize and discuss their evil schemes. It should be said that I'm perfectly happy with the information revealed. It's extremely interesting and engaging. My issue alone is with the clunky choice to present it in the flashback of a particular character that would have had no idea about these secrets and private conversations.
How did you know about the parts you weren't there for?
The World War II analog with the Nazi comparisons are very clear. From the brutal mistreatment of a race of people all the way to the medical experimentation on live human subjects. Even the flame alchemist of the past in a way feels like the creator of the atomic bomb. He created something spectacularly powerful, but in the process assured the deaths of millions with its very creation. There's a very interesting commentary here concerning the place of generational responsibility and the shouldering of atrocities in the name of potential future peace. It's a haunting concept and one I was thrilled to see explored in this volume. Our good friend Ron, like any bright-eyed youth unfamiliar with the horrors of humanity, trusts in his abilities to leverage this power for good. He didn't want to bring destruction but unity to this world. From the perspective of Scar, I think this story succeeds in painting a very grim image of war and presents the perfect setup for Scar's inevitable revenge story. Unlike Ed, Scar is the concerned and scared younger of two brothers, with his older brother, due to his love for his family, electing to replace Scar's severed arm that he lost in combat with his own. Thematically, this is quite powerful and visually communicates that very theme effectively. Through saving Scar's life, his older brother sacrificed himself. Awakening on the table of Winry's parents, following those horrific events, Scar is left with an arm that has only the power to deconstruct or destroy. It's a nice visual metaphor for the revenge lust a grief-stricken younger brother might feel when his family and people have been wrongfully ripped away from him. Young Ron, despite getting the powers he was so convinced he could change the world with for the better, sees himself burdened instead with an immeasurable responsibility and a death toll he wasn't prepared to shoulder. Everything in this section shows the naivety of the youth and the death the older generations bring with them for these people to endure. The utter indifference of it all that they feel. With the best quote from this section being from Ron Mustang himself. He says, "You say I'm an idealist, but unless someone chases after pipe dreams, nothing will change." Oh, actually, you know what? I made a mistake. You see, I said Scar shared his story, but in actuality, it wasn't him, but it was Dr. Marco informing Scar of what happened back during that time of the Civil War. The reason I was so confused by this was because we see Scar's entire backstory in the manga, for which Dr. Marco would have absolutely no clue about, yet somehow we see it. Firstly, I do want to say, however, that as a story in flashback, these sequences work remarkably well and are fantastically engaging. This is one of my favorite sections of the entire story. But the framework of this flashback, the logic of who's telling this story and from what perspective, just makes absolutely no sense at all. Interestingly, the Brotherhood anime actually fixes that flashback issue with Scar, instead showing us this portion of Scar's backstory when he's faced with the gun from Winry a while back. So I guess it's important to remember that 100% authenticity to the manga can be a bad thing. I've been reading this story for the first time alongside one of my friends, and together we're trying to predict who Pride will eventually be revealed as. At one point, my friends seemed to be convinced that it was this Kimberly dude. He did seem like an obvious candidate. He killed more people with a smile on his face than what many might conceive as normal, but I do, however, think it can't be him. From a narrative and framing standpoint, it makes little sense, to me at least, for him to be Pride. Though I will say, not impossible, of course. Something this story is trying to do is taunt and tease us into guessing who Pride is. He's being consistently out of frame during any and all interactions he participates in, and so I'm convinced it's going to be someone we least expect. And that means, in my mind, someone on the side of good. The more convinced we are in their innocence, the better, and more surprised we'll ultimately be. So I thought to myself, who are the candidates? And 3 names came to mind. Well, okay, technically 4, but I'm less sure of the last one. Dr. Knox is my first guess. Admittedly, I don't actually think this is very likely. He goes way back with everyone, has the trust of Mustang, and has ties to the military in some shape and form. He'd be a useful pawn and source of information, but yeah, I'm not convinced it's him. He seems extremely genuine. But if not him, how about Dr. Marco? As you can see, I don't much trust the doctors. This is the person I am least sure of, and honestly, is more a shot in the dark than anything else. Seeing as Marco's identity has already been compromised before, and in order for it to be him, Arakawa would have needed to have been playing the long con even when main story characters weren't looking. And to be honest, that seems kind of cheap, and I honestly don't think it's what she would do. Next up, Hawkeye. Hawkeye is getting a lot of screen time right now, lots of time in front of her eyes, and we've been bonded to her specifically. Honestly, I still think this one is a long shot. I give it like a 20% success rate, but my final pick, I am 40% sure it could be her. Maria Ross. How perfect would it be for her to be someone that's been close to the action since day one? How fortunate is it that she's been effectively written off the story? I think there's a decent chance it could be her, and that her framing was all a ploy to get the traitors in the military to reveal themselves. But we shall see how right, or more likely, how extremely wrong I am. Also, another long shot. Falman, he just got transferred up north. That becomes important later. And yeah, maybe maybe Hayate, the dog. God, I mean, the dog is like, I feel like that's a genius pick. If it's the dog, man, that would be an amazing shot in the dark. But yeah, anyway, back to the story.
Fullmetal Alchemist.
If nothing else, what Kimley demonstrates is that the Philosopher's Stone allows those who wield it to, in some way, bypass equivalent exchange. Could this be the reason why Father was able to do the same and manifest what he needed for Al? Perhaps he's not a god, but in fact a delusional old man holding a gross, bloody stone. And honestly, as I look at him growing gluttony on his chest like a mother with an infant at her bosom, I can't help but feel like I don't have even enough information to know for certain. Or make an educated guess for that matter.
軍事国家時代の海をすべて絞り出さないと、この国は新しくならない。
Aside from that, there are some great contrasts made between the prior generation and the current older ones, with those like Hawkeye, Armstrong, and Mustang expressing a clear willingness to absorb the depressing situation before them, walk through a river of blood and corpses, all in the name of peace for the future generations to come. There's a very strong anti-war message in this volume that manages to say what it wants without feeling pretentious or like it's oversimplifying the greater issue. At the beginning of volume 15, Arakawa wrote, "In researching this volume, I interviewed veterans who had been at the front during World War II. I read countless books, examined film footage, and listened to many detailed and intense stories firsthand. But the one comment that affected me the most came from a former soldier who lowered his gaze to the tabletop and said, 'I never watch war movies.'" War is an extremely complicated situation and topic to tackle, and as a writer I think it's tantalizing to want to preach and tell your own story and perspective, but instead Arakawa wrote from the life experiences of those she's interviewed, built a world that reflected that and populated it with characters that she could then speak for, react how they would react, perform how they would perform, and feel how they would choose to cope. But in the pits of despair, she offers us a shining light at the end as the new generations offer hope for the future. And whether it be naive and idealistic wishes or stern conviction, it's comforting to see that even those ill-equipped idealistic trainee soldiers manage to find the resolve necessary to survive and not get lost in the past acts that they were once instructed to commit. It's a similar situation in philosophy that Edward finds himself in and employs regularly to this day. Move forward with a great dream for the future. Don't focus on your failings, or all you will contribute is failure.
何かあるんだ。あの二人の錬金術に。
まだまだどん詰まりじゃないぜ。
While Volume 15 was crammed full of juicy material, Volume 16 comparatively takes its time and is a volume that consists of largely setup, establishing 3 clear parties that are all going to converge. Ed and Al looking for the little girl with the weird panda bear thing, so they can learn that purification alchemy to better deal with that father guy down the road. Group number 2 is Scar, now accompanied by the man he sprung from captivity, Dr. Marco, along with that little girl that they are after. They are now heading north for where Scar stashed his older brother's research. And finally, Kimblee, the most sadistic killer in this story, established perfectly during the last volume. He is released from prison in an effort to bolster the side of evil, sent on a mission north to take out Scar. Truth be told, this very much feels like a very distinct and different section of the story to anything else revealed to us thus far. Not just how it's structured in being this cat and mouse trifecta of possibilities, heroes, antagonists, and anti-heroes, but just as crucially in how the entire section is catered to by its environment. However, this doesn't mean that we are entirely leaving behind Central City. Far from it. Mustang will of course continue his under-the-radar quest for resources, leads, and allies while all of this is going on, but what I will say is that so much of this story has seen these characters color the pages of rolling fields or confined city landscapes like this, and naturally this made a lot of sense and I'm not complaining about it in the slightest. But what I am thrilled about concerning this local shift is how different its environment allows the story to feel. The way this Briggs fortress is designed, characterized, and led in the manga is spectacularly distinct to anywhere else we've seen up until now. Everything from the environment to the challenges that creates and the temperament of the soldiers and leaders in this barracks all complement each other, creating wonderful new opportunities for tension. Major General Armstrong is one such character that embodies this setting. Cold, calculated, and stern, she and her loyal soldiers survive here because of their trust and respect for one another, which ends up proving to be their most valuable quality when Kimblee is released from prison and makes his way north in pursuit of Scar. The scene where these two eventually meet on the train is framed very dramatically in the manga, and honestly, I thought this was going to be some very action-packed fight. And while there is action in it, once again Arikawa undercuts the moment with an opportune dose of reality, bringing to light how out of shape Kimblee must have been in comparison to Scar, who's been fighting all of these years. And the results speak for themselves. Kimblee being brought to hospital with a big wound, but ultimately comes into contact with HQ and eventually into the fortress where Edward and Al arrive thanks to the use of his philosopher stone. But not before Edward and Al and the fortress itself is infiltrated suddenly by an unknown enemy. Now, I'm not gonna lie, when this dude erupted from the floor beneath, 2 things ran through my head. 1, who the hell is that and why are they tunneling?
The answer to those questions will be answered right now.
I quickly realized that I had in fact, for a split second before, been introduced to Sloth long ago. As an enemy, he offers a thrilling new challenge ripe with possibilities with him being a de facto armored tank with quite literally no brain power at all. Direct attacks won't work, fire won't work, and so the forces of Briggs along with Armstrong work together to push the beast outside into the freezing tundra. It's a moment of strategic genius in my opinion, and once again leverages what makes this area that much more interesting and unique in the first place. And through exploring the seamlessly endless tunnel this creature created, Armstrong, in all her gorgeous, beautiful strategic wisdom, uses this as an opportunity to entice the up until now tight-lipped Elric brothers into spilling the beans on what exactly they haven't been telling her about High Command and these tunnels. But in summation, they are all linked to other key points of the surrounding area where prior battles or civil wars had been raged, making for a enormous transmutation circle. It's here all the pieces fall into place and we're once again told what Hughes died for uncovering. From there, they formulate a measured and subtle plan of attack. God, I love this character. She is incredibly resourceful and measured with every move she takes. And even later in moments where Ed and Al overextend themselves or have to think on the fly, her situation is always the most stable thanks to her initial approach. God, I am so happy she's on our side.
And now for something completely different.
I think it's fair to say at this point that with every consecutive scene Hohenheim participates in, I have less of an understanding of what exactly is going on here. He's like anti-exposition. He's like ants for my brain. I don't know, I'm bad with words. And moreover, my theory about Hohenheim is entirely dead in the water now. He does seem to be immortal and as a result thinks of himself as a monster, so much so that he doesn't want to touch his children for fear that it might infect them with some sort of curse that he has perhaps. Then he leaves for research. Trisha dying from a sickness seems oddly convenient now at this point, but who knows for sure? I mean, things regarding this particular storyline have been so crazy, I'm honestly willing and waiting for him to take off a mask and be all like, "It was me, Austin! It was me all along!" And you know what? If that did happen, it wouldn't be the weirdest thing Hohenheim has done. And just to throw more fuel in the fire that was my brain at this point, this happens.
Fullmetal Alchemist.
There's a wonderful sense of camaraderie in the Briggs fortress, and when the soldiers go down into the tunnel where the other soldiers disappear to save them, the coming scenes and setting is horrific. This entire section has a real sense of fear and horror. I'm a massive fan of the cold as a horror setting. The restrictions it puts on the situation and its characters is perfect for this sort of tale. Everyone is trapped inside this fortress, monsters beneath them, deathly cold outside, and enemies all around. It's such a wonderfully tense and brilliantly executed context for the main characters to be contained within, particularly now that Winry is here. And then, of course, the story proves me wrong yet again.
私の名はブライド始まりのホムンクルス
Now, I want to make one thing perfectly clear so I'm not a complete and total failure in your eyes. While I didn't predict this kid was Pride even one chapter before he was revealed to be the OG homunculus, I did predict it was him at the last possible moment where I can say I somewhat predicted it. And it's all because of the words his mother chose to describe him at the beginning of this scene. When she said he was, quote, her pride and joy. I was like, ooh, there's the little bastard, there he is. But then immediately after, I'm like, damn it, they revealed it right away. All my predictions were wrong again. I really thought I was onto something with the dog. That would have been hilarious and honestly kind of genius, and I'm proud that I guessed that. But the kid being Pride here works too, I guess. He's the first homunculus and he's surrounded by the darkness that killed those soldiers in the tunnel, so I guess now we know how they died. But interestingly, on the topic of Pride's revelation, apparently 1 year before Pride's identity was ever revealed, someone actually guessed who it was. It's a very interesting read. I highly recommend it. The conversation, or should I say confrontation, between Kimberly and Edward is fantastic. It's a perfect example of rising tension and stakes as Kimberly reveals what he wants Edward to do. Ed refuses naturally and asks why he does what he's doing if he's not a homunculus. And through that disclosure, we learn just how twisted and cruel Kimberly actually is. Like a Goebbels from Hitler's ranks. Someone that can get things done and isn't afraid, or should I say morally bankrupt and insane enough, to get his hands dirty. And that's when everything Ed has ever wanted is dangled right in front of him. The answer to his quest for his brother's body, his arm, his leg, the answer to everything they've been seeking together. The Philosopher's Stone is offered to him for his cooperation. And now he has to decide what is more important, what he wants or his morals. This is a textbook example of what a villain can offer a hero in a story. It exposes the villain's true nature and taunts the hero away from what makes them just. I love moments like this because it really establishes the difference between the two characters involved and exposes who they really are, for better or for worse. And later, once Ed, Al, and Winry fake agree to help Kimberly search for Scar, another opportunity presents itself for Winry to reveal who she really is.
腕このままだと失血死しちゃう。
Upon finding and cornering Scar following a Chimera attack, in a similar fashion to how Ed and Al were handed everything they wanted on a silver platter with Kimberly, so too is Winry in this situation. Restrained in front of her, she confronts him and instead of succumbing to her darker feelings concerning him, she uses her healing hands not to hurt him, but instead bandage up his wounds. And right after this is yet more fuel for a wacky theory of mine. If negative feelings build up, the flow of the world will become negative. On the other hand, it's possible to accumulate positive feelings and make the world flow in a positive direction once again. This is a very interesting choice of words recalled back to by Scar that his older brother said to him. A quote that in my mind maps onto the sort of alchemy or purification arts May and her culture has become proficient using. This idea that her power comes from the flow of energy in the earth, it makes me wonder if this story is framing the sort of alchemy Edward, Mustang, and Al use as that of negativity. It's a tool of war used by the dogs of the military, used to harness power for violent ends, whereas the purification arts are derived specifically from medicine, used to help and to heal people. And so I wonder if this negativity that's being sown through constant war, hatred, racism, and revenge by the forces of evil, I wonder if it bolsters their power, while the decisions Edward and Winry made in this volume, like not accepting to use something so morally reprehensible like the Philosopher's Stone, or simply enduring and breaking the cycle of hatred in Winry's circumstance, is the greater theme of this story. To not take the easy way out for one's own selfish desires, but to instead go that extra mile because it's the right thing to do. So much of what General Raven depends on when trying to convince Armstrong is her ego. He tries to prey on her fear of aging, her material or selfish desires, and expressly points out that there will of course need to be sacrifices. Sacrifices he is okay with because he specifically is one of the chosen few that will reap the rewards and not any of the negatives. But yeah, that's just my theory here and now. Alright, so this looks bad, and it is, but not for the reasons one might initially think. And I love that about this story. However, this also marks the last time Ed will see his brother until
The Day of Reckoning.
And truth be told, while things are still falling into place even this far out, I must say I am extremely excited for what will be the final video in this series next week. But before we get to the
Day of Reckoning.
Okay, before I move on to that material, we first need to set this chessboard up, and there's some amazing stuff. I think my favorite part about this remaining section is the level of covert ops, assumptions, and risks the hero side needs to rely on to advance in any small way they can. Arakawa has done a fantastic job of spreading all the key characters all over the map, quite literally, and as a result, we have so many unlikely scenarios and team-ups. For instance, I get the feeling at this point that Arakawa wants to separate Edward and Al before they inevitably reunite at the end of the story and embrace all lovey-dovey. But in order to do that, she needs a just cause, and man, the justification she comes up with is again simple, but utterly genius. We all know Scar is taking Winry in this instance because it takes her quite literally out of a hostage situation, and Ed is hoping that Kimberly will buy this, but unfortunately he doesn't, and in fact he's already sent central goons all over Mt.Briggs where her, Scar, and the rest of Team Hero are heading. And so, because they need to be warned and no one can go outside in this blizzard, Al is sent because he can't feel the cold. He's the only one that can do it. And that's brilliant, and it creates the necessary distance between the two main characters. It's a goated decision, and on top of that, this happens. And I know what you're thinking. You're right, I don't know what that means. You're catching on. But thankfully, Arakawa is a gracious god and bestowed upon me the greatest gift this story can bestow: understanding. Because we finally get context for Hohenheim, or should I say, Slave number 23. I think if you left me with this story up until now for a dozen years, I wouldn't have ever guessed that he was a living Philosopher's Stone. I would never have put those pieces together, and I would never have put him and the lost city of Xerxes together at all, let alone that he was once upon a time with all the sins. That said, it does all make sense now, but perhaps my favorite aspect of this flashback and greater conflict comes from something that was said about humankind in general. Man, in this section, is described as having all of the 7 deadly sins inside of them, and that those those sins all play a role in carving out the terrible situations the world is facing today. And this very much feels like a real-life commentary Arakawa is making on modern society in general. Alright, so this fight scene, it's spectacular, and it's great in my mind for one specific reason. This will sound really random as hell, but trust me, I'll bring it back again to Fullmetal Alchemist. I love all aspects of this story that rely on the mechanics that grant it novelty. So what do I mean by that? Well, in 2016, a film called Sing, produced by Illumination Entertainment, reminded me of how crucial this quality Fullmetal Alchemist has. This is a film, Sing, that quite literally did not need to design animals as the main characters in order for the film to work. And in my mind, that's a problem. In fact, them being animals and not utilizing that not only makes their appearance entirely pointless, but leaves so much on the table for exploration that it's frustrating. On the flip side, if you look at a film like Zootopia, which came out that same year, the characters being animals is quite literally integral to the plot. The story itself wouldn't make sense without that aspect. And you might think that sounds like a weakness, but it's really not. It's a strength. Using elements of your story that make it unique, weaving it into the plot, not only gives your story a sense of identity, but also makes it that much more enjoyable and unique. There are a million stories like that which Sing demonstrates, but there are no stories like Zootopia, or in this case,
Fullmetal Alchemist.
Like, there's this battle that erupts once Kimberly outs himself as totally in the know regarding their ambush and sticks 2 chimeras on Ed. During this battle, Ed uses the very alchemy that makes this story unique to defeat the chimeras, by removing the ammonia from the sticks of dynamite he found around him. That is such a fun and inventive idea, but it's also an approach to combat literally no other story can do without straight up copying Arakawa's power system here. It's a great idea. This is exactly what I look for in a great fight, injecting elements that make the story unique and interesting. And on the topic of battle, something I noticed and haven't mentioned yet is that there are a number of instances where it would be convenient or expedient for Edward and Al to just kill their enemies and move on without a second thought. They are reminded time and again that that trait that they possess, that softness, will get them killed, that it's a weakness. And this can be reflected in how they try to bring the chimeras over to their way of thinking, but I genuinely think it's this philosophy that the older generation calls naive that will once and for all break the cycle of negativity, revenge, and violence that this land has endured for hundreds of years. If we care for everyone's well-being and even our greatest enemies, then there's truly hope for peace. And that is something more, infinitely more, than what prior generations have offered. However, that doesn't mean that along the way there won't be some truly devastating speed bumps. This freaked me the hell out. As Ed discovers how massively injured he is, I'm reminded that this is the first major time his physical human body has sustained any significant damage. And at that very moment, Al falls to the ground. I guess their theory about Edward and Al being tied together is true in some way. In addition to that, Hohenheim delivers a message to Pride for father, which is pretty cool. Kimberly decides to bring the Drachma army to the door of Fort Briggs, what a Chad, and Envy is tipped off to the whereabouts of Winry and co, which would be all fine, but for some reason, when I finished reading that last bit, closing volume 19 and opening volume 20 to start the next chapter, suddenly a mini time skip happens. The battle at Fort Briggs is over, Edward is fully healed, and Envy is already after catching up with Scar, Winry, and the rest. I found that a little jarring when I was reading, I won't lie, particularly because we already felt as though we were building up to a proper time skip, but yeah, I don't know. Did the anime do anything different? Did you guys feel this way around this section? Let me know in the comments. This is one of the coolest fight scenes, man. Like, again, using everything that makes the story unique, and it even managed to give Dr. Marco, everyone's favorite man on his knees crying, a chance to redeem himself in some capacity. And what a finish, like holy hell! I mean, I love that they confuse envy with this strange Zing alchemy, but when Marco revealed that he has a transmutation circle etched onto his palm and just blows the ever-loving poop out of envy, leaving them as a shriveled up prune of a homunculus, I felt all sorts of catharsis. Or did I? So, as a quick break from the weird and terrible stuff in this video, there was one scene that actually got me to tear up a little bit. Or should I say, one line. It's a blink and you miss it moment, but it occurs between Rose and Winry when they first talk. And it's great.
エドが立ち上がるための足を作った人か。
This is a line that harkens back, for me, to the very first moment I really fell in love with this story. Back when Ed told Rose to pick herself up and said that she should be grateful that she has 2 strong legs that can lift her up and take her to where she needs to be, I didn't realize then how much a sentence like that would mean in the broader context of this story, and in many ways, it reminded me quite a lot of a similar moment that occurs in Berserk towards the end of its very first arc. And it just goes to show once again that the healing hands, the kindness that so many might color in the older generation as weakness, can not only change the quality for one person's life, but as Rose says, can indirectly save the lives of hundreds, maybe even thousands. That's a brilliant moment, and one that Arakawa really brought to life in just one short sentence. It's beautiful. And oh yeah, here's an army of creepy, lifeless dolls. Yeah, that's not good. But you know what is good? Greed. But okay, not literally, but okay, the person. And I'm so happy because, like, I was always a fan of Greed, the character, not the thing yet, the character. Even on day 1, I was a fan of him. I was all in on this character. Loved his vibe, but then he died. Big sad, right? But now he's back with his original memories and full-blown anti-hero. There's an absolutely epic conversation or confrontation between Greed and Edward that takes place right at the end of Volume 20, and in it, as a really nice contrast to Greed and Edward's last encounter, where Ed absolutely disregarded any and all consideration of working with him, right now Ed puts his pride to the side and agrees to be his henchman, lowering himself. And the quotes, man, the quotes are fantastic. Greed says, "Are you sure you won't regret it?" Meaning this decision. To which Ed responds, "Don't insult me. My whole life's been a lesson on regret." Man, I just love this story. I love these characters, and right now, all of them are spread out across the world, the map of this world that Arakawa has built for us, readying themselves to come together for that fabled Day of Reckoning. Everyone is either in hiding, preparation, undercover, or straight up chilling with the bad guys, ready to make their move. But man, is this build-up sublime, and I honestly cannot wait to finish off this incredible series next week. I am on my hands and knees, hoping and praying that Arakawa lands this ending and delivers what should be a near perfect conclusion to a story. But that'll do it for this week. I'm Toy Not Mark. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you all next week.